Howdy again everyone, and today I'm doing something a little different. I'll be testing out a 43mm lens that costs around $6,000 US. But hey, you also get a free camera with it, so that's not so bad. The new Leica Q3 43 camera is the same in every way as the original Q3, except for one major difference: its lens. A 43mm f2 lens is permanently fixed onto this camera instead of a 28mm one, and buying the Q3 43 camera is the only way to get hold of this one. So I thought, why not make a special review of the lens itself to go alongside my review of the original Q3 camera. I thought that maybe you'd all be as curious as I am to know how it tested out. There are links in the description below to my review of the original Q3 camera, as well as my review of its original 28mm lens. Now, if you're going to have any lens permanently fixed to your full frame camera, then 43mm is hardly a bad choice. It's not a wide angle, but it does still manage to give a very natural looking perspective, about the same as that of the human eye, and a maximum aperture as wide as f2 means you'll be able to get somewhat out of focus backgrounds here for a little subject photography, although it's not telephoto enough for getting tight portrait pictures, of course. Combined with image stabilization, that makes this a good lens for shooting in darker conditions too. I'd like to thank Leica very much for loaning me a Q3 43 camera for a week or two for testing, although as usual this is a totally independent review and they had no input into the video at all. The lens's build quality is basically the same as the 28mm version on the original Q3 camera. Absolutely gorgeous, as you'd expect at this price point, small, solid, and with an elegant, thoughtful, tactile design. The first thing I like about it is its macro control dial right at the rear. Turning this will set the lens into macro focusing mode, extending the bottom of the hyperfocal scale in an action that feels smooth and looks totally awesome. Something I should note though is that in macro mode, the lens's aperture only seems to open up to f2.8, even if you've set your aperture to be brighter than this. Then comes the focus ring. This turns very smoothly and precisely. There's a handy finger rest at the bottom, which also has a switch to let you lock the lens in or out of autofocus mode. Another neat design, although the switch itself is a little fiddly, and I slightly wish that focus ring had been just a little firmer, turning just a little bit more heavily. When it comes to manual focus, the lens exhibits only a small amount of focus breathing, nothing that would cause you any kind of problem while video making. The autofocus on this lens works silently, accurately, but only averagely quickly. In front of the focus ring comes aperture control, which turns evenly with perfect gentle clicks at every third of an f-stop. On the original 28mm lens, it was far too easy to accidentally turn the lens from f1.7 onto automatic mode, but on this lens the push needed to make the transition is just a little firmer, thankfully. I'd like to see Leica add a little lock switch to that mechanism, like Sigma and others do with their lenses. The lens's front filter size is a small 49mm, and the Leica Q3 43 is still an image stabilized camera. I found its stabilization really helped me to get sharp images in the dark. The lens comes with a metallic Coke can style hood, which is not to everyone's taste, and a slip-on cap to go on top of that, which does at least fit quite nicely. I never bothered with the hood though. So overall, the lens's design and build quality is absolutely gorgeous, with some thoughtful and unique ideas, just like the 28mm model. Anyway, image quality, and this lens has quite a job to do as it tries to satisfy that 61 megapixel full frame sensor. The Leica Q3 43 camera is making automatic image corrections here too. At f2, picture quality is perfect in the middle, perfect sharpness and perfect contrast. Over in the corners, picture quality continues to be fantastic, if just a little softer than it was back in the middle. At f2.8 and f4 we see tiny improvements in sharpness and contrast, with the lens staying this sharp down to f8. f11 starts getting softer due to diffraction, and f16 looks noticeably soft. Still, it's a pretty stupendous performance here, and the lens is sharper than the original 28mm model, especially in its image corners. I never cease to be amazed by Leica's optics these days. Okay, let's bypass in-camera corrections by shooting in RAW and see about distortion and vignetting. I think we've found the cause of the image corners being just a touch softer than the middle. Right in the edges we see that some barrel distortion is having to be corrected here. But I'm surprised to see very little in the way of vignetting though at f2. At f2.8 the image looks the same, but at f4 those corners are just a little brighter. Still, if you're editing some raw images out of this camera, you might want to make sure that barrel distortion is cleared up. As I mentioned before, this lens has good macro functionality, focusing down to 27cm in macro mode, which is a nice little bonus, especially as this is the only lens you'll be able to use on this camera. Might as well keep things flexible, right? As I mentioned before, in macro mode, the lens's maximum aperture seems to be f2.8 now, even if you set the aperture ring brighter than this. The good news is that sharpness continues to be excellent at f2.8, even close up, although blue colour fringing is noticeable on contrasting edges. Stop down to f4 for that to be slightly reduced. Now, let's see how this lens works against bright light. It's a slightly better than average performance here. Some flaring artifacts can clearly be seen, but the lens maintains its very good contrast. And while we're working in the dark, let's take a look at chroma levels. At f2, bright points of light in the image corners see only a hint of smearing and just a touch of purple fringing. Stop down to f2.8 and what's there is essentially gone. Well, let's move the camera a little and take a look for sun stars. You have to stop all the way down to about f11 to see those emerging. At f16 though, they get nice and strong. Next up, bokeh. I very much liked the quality of this lens's out of focus backgrounds. Specular highlights have minimal substructure or outlining, and also a surprisingly low cat's eye bokeh shape towards the corners. Honestly, that background softness is legitimately impressive. And finally, related to bokeh comes longitudinal chromatic aberration. On this lens, it's unfortunately quite noticeable at the maximum aperture, quite strong actually. Stop down to f4 and it's stubbornly sticking around, but at f5.6 it's gone. Overall, well, it was a bit indulgent of me to test this lens fully because, well, the only people who can experience it are those who blow $6,000 on a Leica Q3 43 camera, but ultimately the lens is frankly spectacular and noticeably better than the original 28mm one. Although the 28 is by no means bad, I think you should just buy the camera with the focal length that suits your style of shooting here, rather than pick on the basis of quality. A lot of people prefer the wider 28mm angle for street photography, and it's easy to see why, but 43mm is far better for subject photography. Anyway, like I say, check out my original review of the Leica Q3 to find out more about whether the camera itself is suitable for you. As far as I'm concerned, the new lens on the 43 version makes it an even more compelling choice for those on a high budget, that is, of course, and it of course comes highly recommended. Well, I hope you all found that video interesting. I know it's not going to get loads of views or earn me loads of money, but what the heck, it's a really fascinating lens to test. If you find yourself watching a lot of my reviews, then check out my Patreon page down in the description below. There you can support the channel while finding all kinds of bonus content. Ciao for now, everyone.